Sawadee Club. Thank you for joining me today. Got a great request, one of my favorites of all time, Thai food. We got a lot of work to do, but it's going to be fun, so let's get to it. Now, I myself am not Thai, but I did work in a couple different Thai restaurants for a few years. I really just love the cuisine, and these are some dishes that are very popular. You'll find them in a lot of Thai restaurants, and they're some of the first dishes that I really fell in love with when I tried Thai food for the first time when I was about 14. I feel these dishes are very accessible and they can act as a means of easing your way into the world of Thai flavors. So let's get to it.
Let's start with chicken satay. This flavorful starter comes together quickly and easily, and afterwards I'll show you two sauces that go great with it. Let's get to work on the chicken. I'm using chicken breast today because they're so popular and they are on sale, but you could really use chicken thighs, and honestly, pork is more popular for satay in Thailand, so give pork a try sometime with this recipe as well. Now I'm just using my knife to cut long, thin strips along the length of the chicken breast. If you're finding this difficult, consider popping the chicken breast in the freezer for 10 minutes. That firms it up and makes it a little easier to work with. Now for our super easy marinade. I've got 1/3 cup of coconut milk, 2 tablespoons of curry powder, 3/4 teaspoon salt, a little splash of white vinegar, a couple tablespoons of brown sugar, a little splash of water. Now we just whisk that all together. There are more complicated recipes out there, so if you like this you could consider giving them a try. But I really like how quickly this one comes together. And it's how they did it at the restaurant I worked at. Now that we've got it nice and smooth, it's time to go in with our chicken. You want to make sure your meat is nice and evenly coated in that marinade. Now we let it marinate for at least an hour, but it'll be even better if you let it go overnight. Now that our meat is marinated, it's time to get it on skewers. If you're planning on grilling these skewers, I recommend soaking your bamboo sticks in water beforehand. But it's raining today, so I'll just be cooking them in a pan. Getting the meat on skewers can be a little tricky, but just keep your skewer nice and flat and work slow and you'll get it. If you make a mistake and have to take the skewer out and start over again, don't sweat it. No one's going to take you to jail for not getting it right your first time. And now our skewers are ready to go. Like I said, these are great on the grill, but that's not an option for me today. I'm using a nice cast iron pan, which you can certainly do, and if you have one of those grill style pans, that's even better. And I want to get that nice and hot over a medium-high flame. Here's a couple tablespoons of neutral oil, and once that oil starts to shimmer, I'm just going to go in gently with my chicken skewers. Finding space any way that I can here. These cook fairly quickly, about 2 minutes per side, but just make sure they have nice color before you flip them over. Now I don't use a thermometer to test these, but if they have nice color and they're nice and firm to the touch, they're ready to go. Now let's talk about the two sauces that go perfectly with our satay. For our peanut sauce, we have to do just a little bit of knife work. This is half a shallot, and I'm just making long slices through it from just above the root end. Then I make one horizontal cut. Now we dice it by cutting perpendicular to those cuts, and we should end up with about 2 tablespoons of minced shallots. We need some ginger, but my mortar and pestle is back in the States, so I'm just going to have to make do with my knife. So I just make some thin slices so that it lays flat. Then I just rock my knife over it again and again, going until that ginger is nicely pulverized. And that's it for knife work. It's peanut sauce, so we need peanuts. I've got half a cup of dry roasted peanuts in a food processor, and I'm just going to pulse that. Pulse it until you end up with something like this, but you don't want peanut butter. If you don't have a food processor, don't panic, just put your peanuts on a cutting board and smash it with a pot. Then just run your knife through those smashed peanuts once or twice, and you'll end up with something pretty similar. Now to the stove, I've got a pot over medium heat, and I'm just going in with 2 tablespoons of neutral oil. To that, I'm just going to add 2 tablespoons of red curry paste, also adding our 2 tablespoons of minced shallots and our 1 tablespoon of pulverized ginger. And we just want to move this paste around in that hot oil for 30 seconds or so, allowing those aromatics to bloom. Blooming your spices, as it's called, is a great technique to learn, and you'll see it in a lot of different cuisines where spices are involved. Once we allow those spices to awaken, we're just going to go in with 1 cup plus 1/4 cup of coconut milk. Now we go in with our 1/2 cup of chopped peanuts. We also have 2 tablespoons of palm sugar for just a little bit of sweetness, and a couple tablespoons of a natural unsweetened peanut butter. For a little brightness, 2 tablespoons of cider vinegar, and for our salty savory, a couple tablespoons of fish sauce. You don't need to cook this very long, you just sort of want the flavors to meld together. After you've added all the seasoning elements, just simmer it for a few minutes until it thickens up nicely. And stir it frequently so the bottom doesn't scorch. Now we remove it from the heat and let it cool down. After it's cooled, give it a taste and adjust the seasoning if necessary. This sauce can tighten up sometimes when it gets colder, so don't be afraid to add a splash of water if it seems too thick. Now on to our quick pickle, which comes together, well, quickly. I have here half a peeled shallot, and this time around I'm just taking off the last bit of that root end. Now I'm just going to split the shallot in half lengthwise and give myself a nice chunky dice. I should end up with about 2 tablespoons. Now for some mild pepper, and in this case I'm using this red Fresno style chili. I take both ends off, and then I just use my knife to get into that chili and take out that core. Now I've got a nice piece of chili to work with. I just cut it in half, stack it, and then I make nice long strips. I gather those strips together, and then dicing is very easy. Now for our cucumber, I have a nice European style cucumber. I'm just going to cut it into thirds, and I'm going to take that third and cut it into quarters. Then I take each of those quarters and just cut out the seeded part. And then I make nice long strips. I gather those strips together and make a nice little dice out of it. For our pickling liquid, we need 1/2 cup of distilled white vinegar, a 1/4 cup of white sugar, about a teaspoon of salt, and we just bring that up over a gentle heat and stir it until everything's dissolved. And after everything is dissolved, we let that liquid cool before we add our vegetables. It's cooled down, so we go in with our vegetable dice. Let that pickle for at least an hour, but it's even better if it goes overnight. So there we have our beautiful peanut sauce and our quick pickle, which just goes so perfectly with our satay. And moving on, let me quickly show you how to make some fresh summer rolls. For that, you will need some rice paper wrappers and some vermicelli rice noodles. And this is what I'm putting in my fresh rolls today. I've got some cucumber strips, which I showed you how to do, some julienne carrots, but you can just use shredded if it makes your life easier, some plain old shredded lettuce, some cilantro, which I leave a little bit of the stem on if it's nice and tender, some scallions, which I didn't have room for on this plate, and those vermicelli rice noodles, which I've soaked just according to the instructions on the bag. Now all we have to do is assemble. I have a bowl of water that is warm like bath water, and I'm just going to dip my rice paper wrapper into that and make sure every part of it is coated. Now I place my rice paper wrapper on a plate and start to fill it. It's important to note that whatever you put down first will be most visible after you've wrapped your roll. If I were doing these rolls with shrimp, which is common, I would put those down first so they show up nicely at the end. But for today we're just doing veggies. If you're doing this for the first time, just remember not to get too crazy with your filling because it's going to make it more difficult to wrap in the end. So now we go to wrap. I take the bottom part of the wrapper, I get that over our filling and kind of pull it towards myself so I make our filling a little more compact. Then I just take in the sides and give it a nice tight little roll. And there we have it with our nice colorful carrots on top. Let me show you one more time. We bring the bottom over the filling, try and make it nice compact, and then just bring the sides in and roll it up almost like a burrito. And I've got big clumsy hands, so you'll probably make a prettier fresh roll than me. Now that peanut sauce goes great with our fresh rolls, but I also want to show you a quick no-cook sauce. This sauce is called Nuoc Cham, which is actually Vietnamese in origin. But since we see fresh rolls at both Vietnamese and Thai restaurants, I figured it would be appropriate to bring it up. Just remember that when you're making and serving it. It's Vietnamese, not Thai. So I have one garlic clove that I'm just making sure is nice and pulverized. Anytime I have garlic in a recipe that doesn't involve cooking, like a salad dressing for example, I like to give the garlic a little bit of alone time with whatever the acid component in the dish is, before I add the other components. This helps just take a little bit of that edge off the garlic. In this case, our acid is lime juice. So before anything else, I'm going to mix that clove of garlic with 2 tablespoons of our freshly squeezed lime juice, and just let it hang out for about a minute before we go in with the rest. This comes together so quickly. I've got a 1/4 cup of sugar, 1/3 cup of water, a 1/4 cup of fish sauce, and there's our garlic reformed with lime juice. And 1 green Thai chili that I just minced up really nicely. And we just mix that until everything is dissolved. At this point, give it a little taste and see where it's at. I felt mine just needed a little bit more lime juice. And since you're practicing your knife skills, you can finish it with a little fine julienne of carrots. And that's a ball game. So we have our beautiful fresh rolls, which you sometimes see cut in half when they're served, our lovely peanut sauce, and our Vietnamese Nuoc Cham. These are light and great. You're really going to love them. Fun idea for a dinner party. Have all your components for your fresh rolls out on a table with a bowl of warm water. Everyone can make their own fresh roll. It'll be a fun, interactive experience for the guest, and it will take pressure off of you, the host. Let's go ahead and make one more starter, Larb Gai, before we move on to our main. This dish comes together quickly and packs big flavor. We just need to toast and grind a little rice first. I've got about a 1/4 cup of Thai glutinous rice. If you can't find the glutinous rice, it's okay to substitute with a jasmine. And I'm just heating that rice over medium heat. It might seem like nothing's happening at first, but eventually you'll see the color start to change. And notice a little bit of smoke forming. We're going for a nice, even golden brown color. We're almost there, and I'm sure you notice the wonderful toasty aroma. And I'm going to call it quits right about there. Take that off the heat so it doesn't burn. It turns out our coffee grinder is missing. So I'm going to try and use this KitchenAid blender. That's not quite cutting it. Cast iron pot to the rescue. So hopefully your coffee grinder is working and your life will be a little easier than mine. But you could also use a blender, and a mortar and pestle also works perfectly well. That's better. You never end up with perfectly uniform pieces, so don't sweat it. We have just a little bit of knife work to do for this dish. I've got 3 scallions here, and I'm just going to slice those along the bias. Got half a red onion here, I'm just slicing, not too thin, not too thick. About 6 stems worth of cilantro here, and I'm just plucking those leaves off, and towards the top I'll even leave a bit of the stem on since it's so tender. For a little bit of heat, which is important in Thai food, I've got 1 green Thai chili, and if you're sensitive to the heat, then I'd recommend maybe wearing gloves when you do this, but at least wash your hands very thoroughly afterwards. So those are our herbs and vegetables, and honestly I feel like maybe that's a little bit too much red onion, so I'll take those off and save it for another purpose. We're going to need some lime juice, so I'm squeezing some now. Always use fresh lime juice. And I like to always taste my lime juice. Maybe they're not the most perfect limes, and the taste is a little harsh. In that case, sometimes I like to add just a tiny little pinch of sugar. Let's talk about our protein. In the case of Larb Gai, Gai means chicken, so we're using chicken. And I'm using breast because they're popular. And there are variations on this dish that use different proteins, so definitely check those out if you really like this one. And we want this chicken nicely minced, so I cut it into strips, cut those strips into smaller pieces, and now I'm just hacking at it. If you've got a butcher's cleaver, now would be a good time to bust that out. So let's finish this dish. I have a couple inches of water, slightly salted, that's just at a simmer, and I'm going to go in with my chicken. I'm just going to stir that chicken around and make sure that it doesn't clump up. And because this chicken is chopped up so finely, it really doesn't take long at all to cook. I'd say less than 2 minutes in total. All about the surface area. When we pull out a piece, it's nice and white with no pink, so we know it's good to go. All I do is strain that out of the water. Then pop that chicken into a mixing bowl. Add all my vegetables and aromatics. To that, I'm adding 3 tablespoons of our freshly squeezed lime juice and 3 tablespoons of fish sauce. And a good couple pinches of our nice toasted rice powder. And give that a nice thorough mix. And this should be a thoroughly seasoned salad. So if you don't see just a little bit of pooling of dressing at the bottom, you might consider adding a little bit more of that 50-50 mixture. but I'm happy with where we're at, so I think it's time to plate it up. Looks great, doesn't it? I can't wait to get into this.
And sometimes you'll see this served with little lettuce leaves, which is great because you can really make yourself a nice little bite.
Now before we make our curry, let's talk about our rice. And in the case of Thai food, we're talking about jasmine rice. Now, cooking rice might seem obvious to you, but it's really important that we do this properly. So once you've measured out your rice, we run some cold water over it. Then we just gently agitate that rice with our hands, and you'll notice how cloudy the water gets. We want to pour that cloudy water off. And we repeat that process again. And we keep doing this until the water clears up. The water will probably never get perfectly crystal clear, but you'll notice that it is much clearer than that first rinse that you did. Once your rice is rinsed and drained, measure your water according to the instructions on the bag. Put that rice over a medium plus flame. Let it come up to a nice simmer, and don't stir it while it's coming up. Drop that heat to very low. Now we cover our rice and cook it again according to the instructions on the bag. Each brand is a little different, so it's always important to read those instructions. Now my pot lid doesn't seal perfectly, so I'm putting a little piece of aluminum foil over it to make sure that it's nice and tight. After our rice is cooked, you might be tempted to uncover that pot, but don't do it. Let that rice sit there covered off the heat for about 5 minutes. Now after our rice is rested, we just go in there with a fork and loosen things up a little bit. Then we cover it again just to keep it warm, but our rice is perfectly cooked and ready to go. Now for our green curry. Whenever I make a Thai curry using these pastes, I like to add some fresh aromatics in the beginning to help lift the flavor. Curry pastes are packed full of aromatics, but they have been sealed up and made shelf stable. So adding some fresh aromatics in the beginning helps return some of that fresh flavor, which is what we would experience with a freshly ground curry paste in Thailand. So let's talk about those aromatics. I have here 1 stalk of lemongrass. I'm just going to take the top 25% of that off because it's a bit woody, but definitely save it for a Thai themed chicken stock. Next, I just want to take a little bit of that root end off. After that, I use the back of my knife blade to just smash that lemongrass up and break it up a bit. Then I cut that stalk of lemongrass in half, and then I cut each of those halves into quarters, and this is really just so that I can get this lemongrass to a place where I can kind of start to mince it. And once I have that lemongrass minced, then I just rock my knife back and forth through it until it's nicely pulverized. Again, this would be a great time to use your mortar and pestle if you have one. And with that minced stalk of lemongrass, I also want a couple cloves of garlic, pulverized nicely like I showed you how to do before. And that's it for our aromatic booster. Back on the stove, we've got a sauce pot over medium-high heat, and we're just going to add a couple tablespoons of a neutral oil. I go in with about 4 tablespoons of that green curry paste. Just letting those aromatics and spices bloom a little bit in the oil. Turn your heat down if necessary. You really don't want to scorch your paste. Next we go in with our aromatic booster. Now we go in with our little aromatic booster, and just like with the curry paste, we just want that to bloom in that nice warm oil. We really don't want to scorch anything here. After we let those aromas blossom for 30 seconds or so, it's time to go in with our 1 can of coconut milk. Now once we add that coconut milk, we do want to cook that for a few minutes. This will make the coconut milk thicken up slightly. It encourages some of those natural oils in the coconut milk to separate out. My boss at one of the Thai restaurants that I worked at used to tell me that the biggest difference between the curries that you see in America versus the curries that you see in Thailand is that curries in Thailand will have a thin sheen of oil on the top of them. Depending on the coconut milk you use, it might have stabilizers added to it, and you won't notice the separation effect. But it's still important to cook it long enough to thicken it up a bit. Now that that coconut milk is thickened nicely, I'm going in with my tofu. A couple tablespoons of fish sauce for seasoning. About a tablespoon of sugar just to round those edges a little bit. About a cup of chicken broth, but if you didn't have the broth, you could use water. I've got about a cup worth of chopped mushrooms. About a cup worth of bamboo shoots. I've got some red bell pepper to keep our curry nice and vibrant. And we just simmer that until our vegetables have softened slightly. And of course, we give that a taste. I felt mine just needed a little extra fish sauce. Keep in mind the flavor should be pretty strong because we're serving this on rice, which is neutral. Once you have it where you like it, turn off the heat and add a nice handful of Thai basil. And that's all there is to it. Look at how beautiful and colorful that is. We serve that in a bowl with our jasmine rice on the side. And please get yourself a portion of rice onto a plate and then spoon yourself a portion of curry. Don't just dump your rice into your pot of curry. It should be a bed of rice, not a swimming pool of curry. This curry tastes great with a variety of proteins, so if you like this, give it a try with shrimp or chicken. Thank you for spending this time with me today. I hope you found this helpful, and I hope you give these recipes a try.